Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is episode number 10 of Pop Culturally Deprived, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're diving into the world of comic books today and looking at DC's Batman Year One on your Damn It, Jim podcast. Today I'm joined by odd wonk Joshua Unruh, who is the very epitome of making the thing. Joshua started his own imprint, Pulp Diction Press, and now writes stories for a living. Welcome to the show, Joshua. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I'm, as you mentioned, a freelance writer, an author. I'm also incidentally like a teacher and a parent and a husband and big-time pop culture aficionado. I've really been enjoying you, Johnny-come-latelying to all of these pop culture things. It's been a
There
good
will
time.
be many more.
Oh, yeah, no. That's why I reached out and was like, so, are you into superheroes at all? So you are absolutely talking to a person who, if it were possible to have PhDs in Batmanology and Batmanography, I would be that guy. I learned to read on superhero comics. And so, like, literally my entire life, that is what I have been reading. And really, the more I talk about how old Batman Year One is, it just kind of gets depressing how long I've been reading superhero comics. But anyway, so not only do I read a lot of superhero stuff, but I write it. I think about it a lot. I'm going to plug myself just a bit right now. So I'm working on a serialized fiction project with another author, Daniel Swenson. He's incredibly talented. He wrote a fantasy novel that I don't hate, which is a big deal. Female protagonist, things actually happen. It's amazing. And so we're working on kind of a mystery man project, but inspired by like pulp magazines, but a little more diverse. Actual women and people of color are in it. You know, not really a thing that happened back in the day.
Yeah, that's impressive.
So, and Batman actually shares a lot of DNA with the pulp mystery man. So if I sound like I know what I'm talking about here and you want to read something I wrote, you can buy the ebook at Amazon and Barnes & Noble and stuff like that, and iBooks as Masks and Mysteries. But if you want to support me a little deeper after that, you can find me at patreon.com/Pulp Diction Press. I am now done pimping my stuff, and we can just talk about Batman.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history and production, although I guess production's probably the wrong word for a comic book series. But Batman Year One was written by Frank Miller with art by, I'm going to massacre this name, David Mazzucchelli?
That's how I've said it.
All right, David Mazzucchelli.
I've never heard it spoken, so we'll go with that.
It was released throughout 1987 as issues 404 to 407 of the main Batman title line. Since release, Year One is considered one of the most important Batman stories told, generally only second to The Dark Knight Returns, which was also written by Frank Miller and released the year before. The Dark Knight Returns helped forge a modern, grittier Batman to remove the memory of the camp from the 60s iterations of the character. Year One showed the origin of that version and cemented the situation of Gotham as a seedy city with a corrupt police that was calling out for Batman and his allies.
I'm going to jump in with a little historical perspective here. So, yes and no to most of that. You're not wrong, but I'm going to nuance it up. Interestingly enough, in 1985, DC Comics decided that its multiverse, like its whole line of comics, had grown too hard for people to understand easily. And so they collapsed these mini Earths, these multiple timelines and such, into one Earth in this massive 12-part maxi series that starred literally everyone they'd ever published and a few people that they had never published before then, that they had like acquired the rights to but hadn't used yet. And it's called Crisis on Infinite Earth. So if I ever say pre-crisis or post-crisis, that's the thing I'm talking about.
Okay.
But part of this is that they did two farewell stories for their two biggest characters, Superman and Batman. And the Superman one is Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. And it's the saddest. It's super sad, for real. And their farewell
No spoilers.
Well, it's pretty, wow. It's just really melancholy, I guess. I don't know. They're saying goodbye to, at that point, something like 50 years of comic book publishing history. So it's rough. Contrast that with The Dark Knight Returns, which is not actually, it didn't really have anything to do with this kind of grittying things up in a way. It did incidentally, I guess I would say, because Frank Miller thinks that Batman 66, the TV show, is dumb, and so was using Dark Knight Returns to say goodbye to that whole nonsense. So it did wind up grittying things up a little bit, but incidentally to its job. I don't know. Maybe nobody else thinks that's interesting. I find it super fascinating, the timing of those two books.
Okay. Batman Year One was turned into an animated film in 2011. And the interesting thing about that is that Bruce Wayne was played by Ben McKenzie, who now plays James Gordon in the TV series Gotham. I like kind of quirky little things like that. I like intersection of, I want to say fandoms, but it's not really fandoms when they're both kind of the same universe, but you know what I mean, right?
We need a new word for that. It's kind of like how the Flash from the 90s TV show is the dad of the Flash on the current TV show.
Right. Or how, which I just learned this, so I'm sure you saw that Richard Hatch passed away this week.
Yes.
And I knew him, I've only seen the 2004 reboot of Battlestar Galactica, so I knew him as Tom Zarek.
Right.
I did not know until I was reading the articles about his passing that he was the original Apollo.
Yes.
I had no idea. And so that sort of thing I think is just amazing. Whenever you get somebody who just loves the universe so much that they do lots of things within it. It's great.
Absolutely. The Batman from the 66 show played, this is complicated, a sort of mentor inspiration character for Batman in the animated series from the 90s. Like those things just, when they can pepper those through, when a property goes on long enough for that, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So this book's most famous adaptation is the Christopher Nolan movies Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. While the movies were not full adaptations, many characters and concepts about the origin and development of Batman seen in Year One were incorporated. And the interesting thing about that is while I have seen Batman Begins, I have not seen The Dark Knight. It is on my list.
Okay.
So there will be a separate show about that in the future.
That's why, for anyone who is listening to the show and knows me, that's why I am not going off on a Chris Nolan tear right now, because they're going to do another show and I'm not going to be invited, and that's better for everybody.
Duly noted.
After you have your show, just we'll talk about it on Twitter. That'll be the way to handle that.
Absolutely. Okay. The Year One craze did catch on a bit, especially for Bat books. DC released Batman Year Two later in 1987. However, future crossover events largely removed those events from the continuity, partly because they tell me Year Two is terrible. Is that right?
Terrible. It's terrible.
I did a little bit of reading on this, and it just sounds kind of insane.
Yeah. I don't understand why they did it. Like, none of it makes it. Yeah. The only thing it's notable for is a relatively, teapot. What am I saying? Tempest in a Teapot celebrity of comic book drawing drew it. Todd McFarlane drew it. It is otherwise completely forgettable except for how bonkers it is.
Okay.
There were some other Year One titles. You had a Catwoman Year One that tried to fix some of the problems from Batman Year One. We'll talk about those as we get into it. There was a Robin Year One, and then there were some other books that sort of followed in that Year One kind of continuity area. The Long Halloween is one of those. The Man Who Laughs is one of those. For my money, I am going to suggest, if anybody reads Year One and wants to go into that kind of young, just starting out Batman area, Batman and the Monster Men and Batman and the Mad Monk, both written and drawn by Matt Wagner. They take actual stories from 1939 Batman comics and retell them. I mean, these stories were maybe 8 to 10 pages long before, and these blow them out into, 6-issue stories that actually, have character development and stuff like that. So, and
when did this come out?
2006, 2007.
Okay.
I highly recommend them. They do a great job. We'll get to the end of Batman Year One, but they kind of dangle that whole, well, I guess organized crime is done. Let's talk about supervillains thing. And both Mad Monk and Monster Men really run with that. The war on crime's over, and now it's time for mad scientists and stuff. I really, really like them. They're excellent.
Okay.
You want to talk about Frank Miller? You want me to talk about Frank Miller?
Why don't you talk about Frank Miller? Because you're way more familiar with him than I am.
Yes, for a long time I was a Frank Miller fan. So Frank Miller wrote Batman Year One. He also wrote the Sin City series, which is sort of a series of series, all through the 90s and some of the 2000s. He wrote a huge chunk of Marvel's Daredevil series in the early 80s. He has written RoboCop 2, I think, is his movie. Stuff that he drew with Chris Claremont got adapted into The Wolverine. 300 was adapted almost panel for panel into the movie of the same name. So that's Frank Miller. We're going to talk more about Frank Miller when a little later, but I was for a long time a big fan of his.
Fair enough. So obviously the big question for me to answer is why I've never read comics, or specifically why I've never read this one.
Such a big sigh, Mandy. Whoa, I guess I better explain this thing.
Yeah. I was just never exposed to comics as a kid. It wasn't something anybody in my family did. I grew up in a very conservative family where in our small town, people went to church and they watched NASCAR. And so comic books weren't really something that I even knew about, really, except for a few little boys might have had them in school.
Uh-huh.
And then as I got older, I figured out I was way nerdier than I ever thought I was. I just really got overwhelmed because there's so much out there. But I have to tell you, with the MCU becoming so popular, it's really got me wanting to go back and read a lot of origin stories, just because I adore the MCU and all of the movies. But there's just so much history that you really need to kind of pick up on the nuances that they're showing you if you really want to get the full picture.
You have two problems there, actually. And I don't know how I started reading comics. That's real talk. I didn't have anybody around me. And like I said, I was 5 or 6 years old when I started reading comics. There were spinner racks in grocery stores is literally the only thing I can think of. Those don't exist anymore,
Right.
But as far as trying to get into it, you're not kidding. So after Winter Soldier came out, the MCU Winter Soldier, people would be like, so this is based on comics. And I would say yes. And they would say, which ones? And I would refer them to that run by Ed Brubaker. And it's amazing. Ed Brubaker and Steve Epting did that book for 10 years. And the Winter Soldier stuff is kind of in the early third or so of it. But here's the thing. When I would tell people to read it, there were 3 different volume 1s from different points in that collection that just said Captain America Volume 1 and had Ed Brubaker's name on it. And I couldn't tell without looking through them which one to give them. So it's an overwhelming proposition, even before you get into things like learning how to read comics, because there is kind of a way that pages are put together and stuff like that. So I
can say even in reading this one, I struggled with a few of the pages in this one, trying to figure out, because most of the panels have very clearly defined boxes around them. Some of them did not. And so it was, wait, do I go all the way down the page and then go back up to the top, or do I read it across? I struggled with that. And eventually I figured it out, because it just, eventually you figure out what they're saying or what they're doing and what actually makes sense.
Yeah.
But when you have to put that much work into figuring out what they're trying to show you, especially when you're reading it on a computer screen where you have to scroll, it can be difficult.
That's changed everything. Absolutely. And really the best pages kind of tell you how to read them, but there's still, some quirks of the storytelling. I like to use the example of if you had never seen a cartoon before and then somebody got conked on the head and all of a sudden birds were flying around their head, you would be like, what nonsense, right? I mean, there's just clues, ticks,
right.
Yeah. So having never read any superhero comics, but having watched at least some of the MCU stuff, Mandy, what were your expectations for Batman Year One?
I don't know that I actually had expectations going in, just because I really know very little about Batman as a character. I think I know I mentioned I had seen Batman Begins. I don't remember anything about it other than it had Christian Bale in it. That's it. I have no idea what the plot of that movie was about. And I was obsessed with Batman Returns when I was a kid, but that was because it had Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman and I loved her.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And apart from her, I don't really remember anything of that movie either. So Batman himself is really kind of an enigma to me, other than, I see the memes on, Facebook and all that stuff. And so I kind of get some of the humor and stuff. But as far as an origin story for Batman went, I had no expectations because I didn't know what the tone was going to be. I had no
Hmm.
idea what the actual plot was going to be. And so I just went into it thinking, I've always wanted to read comics. I'm reading a comic and I really hope that I enjoy it.
Okay, great. Am I skipping? Okay, I am skipping ahead. So we'll put a
That's
pin
okay.
in, we'll put a pin in the enjoying it. Now, did you have any experience with Frank Miller or any of his adaptations, the stuff adapted from his work before this?
Not that I was aware of.
So had you seen 300 or RoboCop 2?
I've not seen 300. I've not seen Sin City. Pretty sure I haven't seen the 2003 Daredevil movie or the Wolverine. RoboCop 2, I probably did see. I mean, that would have been way back in the early 90s, right?
That would be more like late
Late
80s.
80s, yeah. So I
Yeah.
probably saw it kind of in passing, like maybe one of those things where I was playing in the living room while my parents were watching it kind of movie. So I think it's safe to say I really have no experience with Frank Miller.
Okay. All right. Here is the point. Well, okay. I'm going to jump around a little bit. Did you enjoy Batman Year One?
I did.
You did.
I
Excellent.
did, absolutely. I read it
That makes
twice.
Oh, very good. Well, I know that at one point you were like, this is taking me a long time to get through, and I was like, oh God, good way or bad way, because it's really kind of dense. Like I forget that it originally was only 4 issues, like 4 monthly
Right. Well,
books.
they're long issues though, and there's a lot of story
Yes,
in
there's just a
in
lot going
there.
on. Yeah. Does this make you want to read other things by Frank Miller?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to caution you because you may have noted that I said I used to be a fan of Frank Miller. Um,
Right.
he has just become just a dotty old racist. Like he's yeah, it's complicated. There are shades of the problems that he has with women and minorities in Batman Year One.
Oh, well, I did notice there was one line in particular that really stood out to me as far as race goes in Batman Year One.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know that I picked up the women stuff as much just because I thought uh what's her name? Damn it, Jim woman. Detective
Sarah.
Essen, Sarah,
Yes.
right? I thought she was portrayed fairly well,
Yeah, no, Essen gets a
especially
big
for the time. But
yeah.
I guess Barbara Gordon was not particularly portrayed well. But Selena was fine.
Celine is fine except she was a hooker. I mean, I'm going to point out to you that Catwoman in her long and illustrious history had never been a prostitute before Frank Miller got a hold of her. So,
Oh,
and
okay,
if you read any more Frank Miller stuff, you'll just kind of see that roll forward through stuff. Um,
got it.
he's got some problems with women and minorities, and to be honest, he made it easy because he kind of writes hacktastic crap now. So you can just, you know, you're good. You're probably good. You could read Dark Knight Returns if you wanted to, but we should talk about it. And
Okay,
otherwise, otherwise I mean, there are still Sin City books that I reread that still have the problems in them, but I think own the problems a little better than a Batman book can, if that makes sense. But yeah, so word of caution on Frank Miller. Word of caution, especially there's a book called All Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder. Stay away from it. It's hot garbage.
okay.
So
I
yeah,
will. I probably won't read anything that somebody doesn't specifically recommend to me. So if he's really that problematic, I can't imagine anybody would actually recommend it anyway.
I would throw some Sin City at you for very different reasons than I gave Batman Year One to you.
Okay.
But even then, honestly, you could probably just watch the movie and you'd be fine. They are extremely faithful to the comics. So
Okay. Well, I am willing to bet that a significant portion of the folks who are listening to this show have not read this book. So let's go through the story and actually tell folks what happened in these 4 issues.
Absolutely.
So in issue 1, we begin on January 4th with a study of contrast. James Gordon is riding the train to Gotham City, wishing he could have flown in to avoid the ugliness of the city. Bruce Wayne flies into the city, wishing he had taken the train to feel the grittiness of reality. Gordon is afraid his wife is pregnant and laments that Gotham is no place to raise a family. He meets his new partner, Lieutenant Flass, and learns pretty quickly that the cops in this town are corrupt when Flass attacks some kids for no reason other than he could. Meanwhile, Bruce Wayne arrives and is met by the press, who hope to get answers about rumors of his love life and future plans in the city. At the Wayne Manor, Alfred welcomes him back home. A month later, we learn that Gordon does indeed have a baby on the way, while Flass warns Gordon off of coming down too hard on other officers. Bruce destroys bricks and trees as he trains, but says he isn't yet ready and must be patient. Flass complains to his boss that Gordon isn't fitting in because he wouldn't take a bribe. The commissioner warns Flass not to take care of it until he's out of town, so he can't be implicated. Later, Gordon leaves for the night shift when he's attacked by Flass's men. They underestimate Gordon, who gets the upper hand. He then tracks down Flass and repays him in kind. And I just, I want to talk about that scene.
Yes, let's talk about that scene and Gordon. Yes, excellent.
Yeah, throughout the whole book, up to this point, they've kind of been setting Gordon up as this kind of tough as nails character in very, very subtle ways. But to actually see him take on these 4 men who have jumped him and then turn around and go back to Flass and do the same thing, I was like cheering for him, but at the same time, I was like, he's kind of scary.
That is one of the excellent additions that Batman Year One kind of brings. It really fleshes out Gordon. He was commissioner from minute 1 before this. Like you only ever knew him as commissioner, and so if they're gonna grit up Gotham City and really turn it into this noir hellscape, we need to have a conversation about the kind of guy that can clean that up from the inside, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, they introduce some very vague military background, which I'm assuming involved Vietnam, because it was the mid 80s and that would have been about the right time frame, give or take. They never really, as far as I know, that never really got fleshed out. They never even really flesh out why he had to leave Chicago.
I assumed, based on information that we get a little bit later, that he left because he turned in another cop who either they couldn't prove that the other cop had done something wrong or the other cop hadn't done anything wrong, and so he was kind of disgraced. Maybe I read too much into that.
No, that's good. For a long time, I thought that maybe he had taken the one bribe that he was ever going to take in his life, and it completely backfired on him. But I think based on multiple rereadings, I think you're closer to it. You know.
Yeah, the scene where Flash stops the car and jumps out to beat up the kids in the alley. Gordon is just watching, and he very specifically says, "I will never take down another cop without proof or evidence or something like that."
Yeah,
and
you better know what's going on before you take a cop down.
Right, and he says he's going to keep it stored in his memory for future reference, and you get that very close-up frame of his face with his little squinty eyes. And so that's when I first started realizing, Gordon is not just this father-to-be man who loves his wife. He's got a little bit of a dark side to him.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a dark side that he has harnessed for being an amazing cop, But Gotham is a hellhole, and who's the guy that's going to not just survive that, but survive it clean? Jim Gordon, And the best part, or I don't know about best part, but his last line of that whole scene kind of ties the bow on it, where he says, "Thanks, Flash, for showing me what it takes to be a cop in Gotham City." This is after he has, beaten him 3/4 to death and left him handcuffed and naked in the woods.
Right.
He'll stay away from Barbara. Gordon gets a lot of excellent character work in Batman Year One.
Agreed.
Probably more than Bruce gets, honestly. But we kind of know his deal because his name's on the cover. So
right. So the first time I opened page 1 and started reading, it took me a little while to figure out that we started with James Gordon and not
Uh-huh.
Bruce Wayne. Like I think I had to reread that page a couple times because at first I was like, okay, it's just narrative. We're just getting the words. We're not really seeing a character yet. And then I got to the panel that showed his face, and my first thought was, that's not what Bruce Wayne looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I was like, okay, and so I kept reading, and then we got to the plane with the cursive writing, which, by the way, I can't stand that cursive writing. But
Oh,
then I was like, okay,
yeah.
that's definitely Bruce Wayne. And so then I went back and reread it, understanding what I was reading, and it helped a lot.
You get so as far as year one's concerned, Bruce Wayne returns to Gotham knowing what he's coming back to, but not sure how he's going to deal with it. Like that's his big question. So for you to get introduced to this new Gotham, if you were a person who'd been reading Batman stuff until until Crisis, or if you were brand new, Jim's really the better guy to introduce the city to you because he's taking it in fresh. Bruce knew
Right.
exactly what he was coming home to. So yeah, that's excellent. I really, yeah, it's a good open to get their sort of competing viewpoints on things.
Okay, let's finish out Bruce's story in issue 1. Bruce nails down an alibi before donning a disguise to do recon in the neighborhood where his parents were killed. Walking down the street, he's approached by a young prostitute. He turns her down, but her handler starts a fight. Bruce defends himself, so the young girl, Holly, attacks while the rest of the girls on the corner join in. Here we meet Selena, who rushes to protect Holly and teach Bruce a lesson. Cops arrive and shoot Bruce, who ends up losing consciousness. The cops debate taking him to the hospital or letting him die, but Bruce wakes up and finds a burst of strength allowing him to escape. Though he's severely injured, Bruce makes a plan to use the cave under the manor, and when a bat crashes through the window, startling him, he decides to become a bat.
This is kind of an adaptation of a much simpler few page story that told the origin of Batman. Batman actually showed up in 1939 with no origin, and you did not find out he was Bruce Wayne until the end of the story.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. Like, especially I have origin fatigue like you would not believe at this point. And my own work tends to skip origins as often as possible. But later you got kind of a backgrounder, and but this is also like 1940, so he's in a smoking jacket sitting in his father's study saying, how criminals are a superstitious and cowardly lot. I must make them fear me. How will I do it? And then the bat bursts in. So I really like this whole, he's nearly bleeding to death. And I really like a lot of the purple prose that's going on here where he says, I'd rather die than wait another hour. Like he could call Alfred and be fine, but I'd rather die than wait another hour. And he's talking to his dad the whole time. And then the bat comes in, lands on his dad's bust. And he's like, yes, father, I'll become a bat. Those are lines from 1940 getting repurposed and recontextualized for this retelling. So pretty
Right.
cool stuff.
I'm not sure that it was done very well because I was a little bit confused by what happened. I had to reread the page a couple of times, and then I only really understood because I could supplement it with the knowledge that I came into the story with. I
Okay.
mean, I know that Bruce Wayne becomes Batman because he's afraid of bats. And
That's actually added later also. Like, I mean, he does have that kind of one-off line of, it terrified me as a boy, but that's it. Like, we don't,
so in
you're
this
not wrong. You're not wrong is what.
Yeah, well, because in this particular scene, I mean, he's just sitting there bleeding to death, pondering, do I call Alfred to come save my life? And then a random bat crashes through the window, and suddenly he's going to be a bat. That doesn't really make sense. It makes more sense if you take the extra textual evidence of the prior knowledge that I had. And so, I mean, I read that page a couple of times trying to really understand the progress of events that led to he decides to become a bat.
You
And I never
definitely,
really got there.
yeah, you definitely have to bring extra, extra textual things to there to make that completely work. Now, that said, I will say, again, he did this in 4 issues, and I feel like Miller did an amazing job of just cramming so much stuff into these 4 issues. But every now and then you can really see the edges where he was like, close enough. I mean, every artist has hit that point. And and I feel like
Right.
okay, I'm going to have the bat burst in now because I'm tired of thinking about how to lay out this page.
Okay.
And I can forgive him. Because it isn't the clearest thing, but you also picked up a book called Batman. So heads up. He's going to wind up
Fair enough.
he's going to wind up in Dracula drag at some point.
Right.
So.
Okay, let's move on with issue 2. Issue 2 picks up in April, and Gordon is responding to a hostage situation. He learns that a man named Brandon is on his way to defuse the situation, but Gordon knows that will end in a bloodbath. He gets there first and takes the hostile down without casualties. Brandon complains to the commissioner that Gordon humiliated him, and we are reminded that the department wants Gordon gone. Unfortunately, the press likes him, so they can't really do anything about it.
Hero cop James Gordon splashed across the front page.
I like it.
Uh-huh.
I like it a lot. So Gordon is having a much-needed night in with his wife, but it's interrupted when he gets a call about a large bat. Batman has interrupted 3 would-be burglars as they're hauling their loot out to the fire escape. One of them gets so spooked that he falls over the balcony railing, and Batman catches him so he doesn't fall 20 stories to his death. After all, Batman's not a killer. The kid's stupid accomplices attack Batman, who must stop them without dropping the kid hanging over the railing. He succeeds, but only just barely. This scene frustrated me so badly because I find it hard to believe that anybody would be that stupid. But then I remember we live in America, and of course people are that stupid.
Well, you're talking about people who they're criminals, right? And a thing that my wife and I often say, my wife is an attorney and I am a crime writer, so we have had these conversations. And the thing that we say a lot of times is jail is for stupid people. Smart people do not actually go to jail most of the time, Also, let's think you're sneaking around, you're a little adrenalized, and then a monster drops down on you.
I mean, I can understand being terrified, but what did they think was going to happen to their friend if they managed to take down Batman?
I feel like you are giving them more altruistic feelings about their crew than is maybe necessarily textual,
Fair enough. Maybe I'm just kinder than they are.
The one thing that I will say that I really like about this scene is that you get a pre-Batman scene of Bruce Wayne not being sure what to do and really screwing it up badly because he gets hurt, right?
Right.
But then once he figures out the method, once he figures out the Batman persona, it becomes how do I do this just right? And he's actually too scary the first time,
Right.
And then after that, though, all you see is 100% competent Batman, which I feel is really important because Batman's superpower is competence,
Right.
So again, Miller had so few pages to work with that some of these beats just feel absolutely masterful to me.
I feel like, and maybe I should wait until after the beat by beat to bring this up, but I cannot help but draw a comparison between the Batman in year 1 and Oliver Queen on Arrow.
Oh, that's not an accident.
Okay.
TV Arrow is basically low rent Batman.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
I was reading this story and I was like, are Bruce Wayne and Oliver Queen the same person?
Okay, so brief side note. Yes, Green Arrow has been a Batman ripoff since day 1. It's blatant and it's obvious. He has an Arrow cave, he has an Arrowmobile, he has a kid sidekick. All of these things he has because Batman had them first. He is 100% a Batman knockoff. And one of the things that endeared the first couple of seasons to Arrow to me was that they owned that and just, yep, we know, and just kept going. Here's a growly voice and here's a scowl and here's
yeah.
But they used Green Arrow because Batman's too big for TV at this point, and also because family drama, which Bruce Wayne doesn't have.
Right, because
until
Bruce
he
Wayne
starts
has no family.
until he starts adopting children,
And apparently getting engaged in year 2. Did I read that? Was that in year 2?
Oh, okay. In 1939, Bruce Wayne had a fiance that he just lied to constantly about being Batman. And so, yeah, they kind of roll that forward a little bit into year 2. And also the ones I like better, the Mad Monk and the Monster Men. But Julie gets a much fairer shake in in the Matt Wagner books. So, yeah. But yes, he had a fiance briefly.
Okay.
I don't know what else to say about that. It's a terrible idea. It just makes Bruce Wayne a bad person. Like, it's not good, you know.
Yeah, I can see that. Because you want to root for him, you want to cheer for him because he's trying to save the city, but he can't be that good guy, that hero, if he's constantly lying all the time.
I mean, there's a line there that we want to be careful about because secret identities are a thing. Like, I really have to nuance Superman for a similar reason. To be fair, though, in Superman's case, you don't want intergalactic despots knowing that your family lives in Kansas. So, you know, maybe
Right,
it's
but even okay, really my only exposure to Superman is The Adventures of Lois and Lane or Batman, whatever, you know what I'm talking
the
about, the
Lois and
TV show.
Clark.
Yes, that one,
Oh
the Dean
my
Cain one.
God.
That's my exposure to Superman, I think. And I think I did watch before Man of Steel. Was it Superman Returns? The one that had Brandon Roush in it?
Oh, it's the worst. Well, I would
I
have
think
said
I
it was
did
the
see
worst.
that one.
It was the worst until Man of Steel happened, which was the worst until Batman versus Superman happened. But
So I feel like, though, even with Superman, eventually he does tell the people he's closest to, right?
well, I mean, he marries Lois, so yeah.
Right. And so that, I mean, that's where that line gets drawn for me. Eventually, because he loves her and he doesn't want to lie to her, he tells her the truth.
Right.
Oliver Queen on Arrow, he brings his closest friends in on his secret identity because one, he knows he can't do it alone, and two, he doesn't want to lie to these people. That's the line that you don't want Batman to cross. You don't want
Well,
him to just keep lying and lying and lying to this woman that he's going to marry.
right. Yes. I mean, I feel like the Flash TV show jumps the gun, and he has them like people are giving Barry a hard time for not telling girls on the third date that he's Flash. And that seems a little early. But yeah, there's a point where you're like, maybe this person I want to spend the rest of my life with, I should stop lying and tell them about this whole other much larger part of my life. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I agree. So that's why I say the Mad Monk and Monster Man give Julie a little bit better shake. Not the best shake, but a better shake.
Okay. Moving forward. Lieutenant Gordon leads a task force at the PD investigating a vigilante that calls himself Batman. Flass insists he's not human. Flass witnessed Batman in action when he stopped a cocaine delivery that Flass was bribed to allow. And he looks a little worse for the wear after the encounter.
I really like that scene too. Like Flass's voiceover of the lie of what was going on while we're seeing the actual thing. I like that a lot.
I liked it a lot too, but I had to go back and check the dates on these sections several times just because the last time we saw Flass, Gordon had just beat the holy hell out of him.
Oh,
and
that's
now we're
true.
seeing him again and he's got a cast on and I'm like, did Gordon hurt him that badly that he's still this injured? And it took me a few minutes to figure out that Batman did that to him.
No, that's legit. That's a good point. I never had that problem, but I mean, I can totally see how you would get there. So, yeah.
I think sometimes I look at things too closely. Especially when I'm doing it for this, you know, where I know we're going to talk about it. And so I need to have things to talk about. And so I'm like looking at every panel, at every word, trying to figure out how everything fits together. And so sometimes I may be a little nitpickier than I need to be.
No, I think you're definitely onto something because without going too deep into the animated movie, one of the things that works, I feel, amazingly well in the comic book are these hard cuts that sometimes jump 4, 5, or 6 weeks at a time. And they work less well in the movie because we're just not used to movies working that way. Like,
right.
do it, and it very closely follows the comic book. So I think you're onto something. I mean, you're new to comics, so that might be part. But also, again, he only had so many pages. That's very interesting. I can see where that would undermine your enjoyment of this otherwise fantastic scene of Flass sucking.
No, it was a great scene. And once I understood that Batman did that to him and I went back and reread it, I was like, this is fantastic. I mean, him insisting that Batman's not human, like he's sitting there in front of a room full of his fellow corrupt cops, these tough guys. And instead of being worried that they're going to laugh at him, he's up there saying, no, this guy's not human, and I loved it. I mean, I
And
thought it was humiliating for him, but he didn't seem to think so.
And still, oh no, I mean, I think he did. Like Mazzucchelli gets a little look in his face where he's like, and Gordon says that one thing where where Flass lies about the fact that he's there arresting people instead of taking a bribe, and then pauses to look around the room to see if anybody's going to argue. I mean,
Right.
it's not a good look for Flass. Anyway, yeah.
So Batman's next stop is the mayor's house during a little dinner party where the commissioner is present. Gordon calls because the commissioner is ignoring his request for extra personnel to track down the vigilante. And just a side note there, why would Gordon call the mayor's house to talk to the commissioner during a dinner party?
I think that's actually the commissioner's house. I think that it's the commissioner's house, and Batman was there because he was having that dinner party with the mayor and
See, I
Falcone.
went back and reread, and the Batman's voiceover is literally, he says next up, the mayor's house.
Huh.
That's
Okay, I
in,
don't know.
I went back and I was like, maybe did I read that wrong? Maybe this is the commissioner's house, but the little voiceover thing specifically did say the mayor's house, and so that scene was a little confusing to me,
Yeah.
unless it was just Gordon is trying to be absolutely persistent, and so he just is going to keep calling and calling no matter where he is.
So I think I can kind of give it like a mid 80s forgiveness thing where you don't have cell phones or pagers or anything. So
Right.
if you are an important city official, you might need to be prepared to be called places that you wouldn't normally, get. Like you call the commissioner's house and they're like, he's at the mayor's. Well, I'll call the mayor's. And you're, you're on his task force. And I say that because, I've seen like late 70s espionage television shows and stuff. And you just get people just like, you realize they must have called 9 places before they finally got to where your main character is, because what other choice do they have? It's 1978 or 1988 or whatever. So
Right.
anyway, I have been assuming for 20 years or more that it was just commissioner's house, but you're probably right. He just says mayor's house. Oh, well.
It happens, right?
Yeah,
So the commissioner is not giving Gordon extra personnel to track down the vigilante because the commissioner likes having less crime, even if the reason is because the vigilante's in town. Batman makes note of Gordon's name before tossing a smoke bomb into the house. A real bomb follows, blowing a hole in the side of the house where Batman proclaims that no one is safe.
Love it. Love it lots.
Yeah, and the commissioner changes his mind real quick and demands Gordon take down the vigilante. So Gordon sets up all of these traps trying to catch him, and Bruce can spot them a mile away and avoid them. But he keeps on with his mission. So Gordon approaches Assistant DA Harvey Dent and probes to find out if he's Batman. But of course, he's got an alibi for each incident, although his alibi is his wife, so I'm not really sure that's airtight. But Gordon seemed to think.
He's also not the greatest, he's not the best suspect. And I think Gordon's doing the cop thing where he's like, look, we'd press him if it were worth it, but I just don't think it's worth it,
Right.
Also, close readers at home might note that DA Harvey Dent would one day become known as Two-Face.
I was wondering about that because when I first saw his name, I thought that my brain wanted to associate that name with a bad guy. And so I was surprised to find out that this was the assistant DA who was working to take down criminals.
Mm-hmm. That's 100% Two-Face's, backstory is that he gets hurt by an attempted murder by, the mob bosses that he's trying to take down and goes a little sideways because of it.
Okay. The other thing that kind of threw me out of the scene was Batman's hiding behind Harvey Dent's desk while Gordon is there.
Yeah.
This is never brought up again, at least in these 4 issues.
Well, yes, it is a little bit, because later when Gordon is livid that Dent let a major drug dealer out on bail and Dent's just grinning like an idiot, the next time we see that major drug dealer is Batman basically terrifying him into turning state's evidence. So they're colluding. Dent and Batman are working together.
I think that was a little bit too subtle for me.
Okay. I feel like the drug dealer thing brings it home, but again, I had a lot of extra textual knowledge that I could bring to this thing even 20, 25 years ago.
Well, and you've read it more than I have, so.
Oh, so many times.
So after Gordon leaves Harvey Dent's office, Detective Essen tosses out Bruce Wayne's name as a possible suspect because of his wealth and the possible motive of the death of his parents. A truck loses control and is about to run over a woman in the street. Gordon can't get to the wheel in time, but Batman appears and saves her. Cops arrive and assume Batman attacked, shooting him in the leg as he flees. Gordon saw him save the woman and tries to stop the assault, but he's too late and Brandon blows up the building Batman was seen running into. And there we end issue 2, which was a pretty spectacular ending to an issue, I have to say. I feel like if that had been me reading as these came out and I had to wait an entire month, I would have been very frustrated.
Oh, for real? I mean, yeah, totally. Not to mention that if I weren't buying a book that was called Batman, I would be like, well, does he make it?
Right.
You know, like,
well, but and honestly, I still do that, because I guess in the shows that I like, I mean, being such a big Joss Whedon fan, you kind of learn that nobody's really safe, even the main character.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, that's fair to a point, but
I mean, I don't think that was a thing yet in the 80s, but and even if he's going to make it, he may be severely injured.
Also, Batman Year One insinuates that there may be other years afterwards.
That's true, but you don't think about that in the moment when you're watching him be blown up.
I agree. I agree with you. It just, it's a great ending. And one thing, again, kind of talking about that like masterful use of the space that Miller has, we got Brandon named a whole issue or nearly a whole issue previously, and we know he's dangerous because Gordon is like, oh hell no, I got to stop that guy, you know. And you even get Selena at one point when I think it's the next issue when Holly's like, stuff's blowing up over there, and she goes, Brandon must have cornered a jaywalker. Like these 2 or 3 lines tell you how dangerous this guy is, and then he's blowing up a building, and you're like, our hero is in trouble. Like,
right.
Speaking of issue 3, the synopsis of issue 3 is pretty short because the whole thing is basically this SWAT team's siege of this building trying to either apprehend or more likely kill Batman. And they have dropped 2 or 3 bombs on the building at this point and then sent in the SWAT team. While the bombs are dropping, the fire catches on the thermite in Batman's belt, so he loses his utility belt and is now down to a very tiny number of tools and weapons. Nevertheless, it's a few dozen SWAT cops in a bombed out building versus Batman, and they don't stand a chance. Like, he just picks them off one by one, picks up the radio and says to Brandon something like, you need to get your men out of here. I can't guarantee their safety. He's just incredibly badass throughout this entire thing, while also legitimately being in peril. Like, we, the reader, know he's down, he's got at least 1 bullet in him and he has no weapons and all that stuff. But these guys are just like, he's so strong and he keeps appearing and beating us up, You also get him catching a bullet defending one of Selena Kyle's cats because apparently there's a Catwoman subplot. I don't know why that's in here. Did you have any feelings about the Catwoman subplot as it unfolded?
I assumed it was setting up something that would come in a later story.
Nope.
Is what I assumed.
Yeah, I think Miller assumed that too, because why else would you waste your precious real estate? But it's really, I don't know. That's my biggest mystery for Batman Year One is why we had this Catwoman subplot.
I mean, 'cause she doesn't do anything other than, she tries to fight him to protect Holly, and I guess that was issue 2, maybe issue 1.
Yeah,
that was issue 1.
Yeah.
And then she's just kind of randomly in the background watching this building burn.
Right. And she shows up later. She shows up later and screws up an investigation, but it's still like, geez, why? I mean, I like Catwoman. I love Catwoman as a character. Michelle Pfeiffer was great. This version of Catwoman is not so great because, again, Frank Miller problems. But it's like, why did we do this? I don't know. At any rate, we are introduced to the last of Batman's weapons, which basically amount to a lockpick 3 knockout darts, and a transmitter that attracts bats. So he's basically holding off these cops while the sun threatens to rise and he's waiting for these bats to show up. He pulls it off, he holds it together, and a cloud of bats just envelops this building and the crowd and the helicopter, and he is able to escape. But in the process, Gordon is a little conflicted. He's like, but he saved the cat and he saved that old woman, and he didn't kill any of these cops that he could have killed. Also, Bruce Wayne covers his tracks. He's skiing, apparently, to cover and broke both arms and a leg to cover up the bullet wounds. Selina begins to make her questionable costuming and life decisions as she becomes Catwoman, and Gordon unfortunately draws closer to his beautiful colleague, Sarah Essen.
I was so disappointed in that. So disappointed. Gordon was supposed to be my good guy here, and he's got a pregnant wife.
Oh, I know. No, I know. I mean, I think we're doing a very specific thing. If you're familiar with noir fiction at all, nobody is the good guy. You know, now here, Batman has to be the good guy, but he also basically avoids personal entanglements at this point in his career. So that's easy, other than the lying, you know. But yeah, Gordon compromising himself a little bit. It's tough to watch or read.
Both. I mean, I felt like I was watching something, you know, while reading this, just because the pictures, the artwork was so vivid.
Mm-hmm.
And it was well done. The emotion, even though it didn't take very many pages, you could feel the attraction building. You could feel the tension that they had between each other and the emotions when they realized that they couldn't continue.
Yes.
You know, and it was kind of sad, even though I was kind of angry with Detective Gordon there, but it is what it is.
Yeah, no, it's so human, right? Like, he fights with Barbara because they have a kid coming, and he works all the time in this terrible city. And so Sarah is there, and she understands cop stuff, and she's beautiful. And, you know, it's just, she's so different than Barbara, and she's easy. Not in a sexual mores way, but it's a lot easier than his married life, right?
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, by issue 4, however, Gordon and Essen realize things aren't going to work. Mainly because Jim actually loves his wife and she's pregnant. Essen applies for a transfer. Gordon continues his work as a hero cop by apprehending a major drug kingpin, Skeevers. Great name.
Great name.
Dent lets Skeevers out on bail. Gordon is angry. This is what I was talking about before, where you know, he's mad and Dent's just all smiles, like, want to borrow my umbrella? I mean, you know, it's just not. They're not on the same page. And it's because Batman is sneaking in to terrify Skeevers into turning state's evidence on Flass. Right. Commissioner Loeb tries to slow Gordon down by blackmailing him over his affair with Essen. Meanwhile, Gordon and his wife call on Bruce Wayne in order to question him about being Batman. This is the place where the Bruce Wayne act is kind of hardest to watch. You know, where he's pretending to be a drunken lout with this girl who is, you know, supermodel girl who, what does he say? Something like, doesn't speak any language he knows.
Right.
You know, and she's just got her tongue in his ear the whole time he's trying to talk to Jim and Barbara. It's just, yeah, it's like, oh, you're such a douche, apparently, you know.
Why did Gordon bring Barbara with him?
Okay, they do actually address that in the animated movie. The only reason I can say in the comic book is so they can have the conversation afterwards that they have. I don't know in the book why. Okay. He only had so many pages. I think you just miss some of that fine tuning. You know what I mean? They bundle it up with the doctor's visit in the animated movie so that, you know, Bruce Wayne's representative says he's available now. Okay, well, we'll go right now, you know, and they're just getting done at the OB.
Okay.
So, I mean, you know, again, only so many pages. It's also interesting that I probably read this thing 100 times before I went, wait a minute, why the hell did he take his wife on this cop business? So, you know, you're doing the thing.
Right.
So, let's see. As Gordon ponders Bruce's possible desire to keep secrets, right in Wayne Manor's driveway, he decides to come clean with Barbara about his affair. Shortly after this, Skeevers is poisoned while in custody and narrowly survives. Baby James is born. Some cat burglaries happen because apparently Catwoman's in the story. I don't know. I don't. Batman nearly gets somewhere in an investigation of the Roman Falcone, but Catwoman screws that up. While pondering what the Roman could be up to, Bruce decides to go crime fighting, but assures Alfred he'd never wear the Batman outfit during the day. This is also a reference to Batman 66. Because he went out, and comics before Crisis, where he went out in the day a lot. Like during the 50s, Batman was a duly deputized officer of the law, because we had to be a good example for the kids.
That's interesting.
Yeah. 75 years. It's been weird, At any rate, so Gordon is called out on a penny ante case, realizes it's at the last possible minute, realizes it's a ploy to separate him from Barbara. Batman has also realized that this is what Falcone was up to and has raced to help Gordon. The mobsters escape with the kid, but after Gordon shoots two of them, so badass. But then he also accidentally shoots a thinly disguised Batman and steals his motorcycle to chase after them. Whoops.
Right.
I mean, it's understandable. He's just in a motorcycle helmet and a jacket, and Gordon is hopped up on adrenaline, and then all of a sudden there's a motorcycle speeding past him. I'm going to shoot that guy too.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, these guys are trying to take my kid, so yeah, I'm going to shoot anybody that moves.
Batman recovers. He's armored. He assures Barbara that he won't let her son die, steals a bicycle, and also joins the pursuit. Gordon runs the car off the road on a bridge. The Roman's nephew, holding his baby, attacks Gordon. In the struggle, they all three fall off the side of the bridge. The baby first, and then Gordon following. But we see that Batman has dove from higher and gets his hands on the kid. I really like that there are 3 panels of Barbara pulling up in a cab, running to the edge of the bridge with silence. And it's not until she gets to the edge of the bridge that the baby crying sound effect comes through. Like, that's a lot of tension. Like, did it work out? I mean, because you're right. Batman's going to be okay. Jim Gordon probably going to be okay. How's baby James? He's...
I was concerned about baby James.
Right. If anybody was going to go down in that, he's the guy. Anyway, now the unmasked Bruce Wayne, or Batman, but unmasked, hands the baby back to Gordon, who says, I'm basically blind without my glasses. And when he hears Siren says, you'd better go. A new alliance, I feel, has been forged. Then you get just a bunch of cleanup. Flass flips on Commissioner Loeb hard. Loeb's never going to go to jail, but he does resign. Gordon's worried about the incoming commissioner being worse, but he is promoted to captain. He and Barbara are seeing a marriage counselor, and it seems to be helping. Unfortunately, some lunatic is threatening to poison the Gotham Reservoir. Calls himself the Joker. But Gordon's not worried. He's meeting a friend. He thinks he can help. That's a reference to the first Joker story, actually. It's called The Case of the Criminal Syndicate. And that was the Joker's first story, was he was poisoning the Gotham Reservoir.
I like this ending because it wraps everything in the story up so neatly, but gives you potential to do more. And I feel like they probably could have done more and done it really well, even though apparently they kind of didn't. At least not with this, not with Frank Miller.
Yes and no. Crisis was weird, and you don't care. But so yes and no is the best answer I can give.
Okay. All right. Well, we have talked a lot about Batman,
Yes.
So
yes.
What else do we need to talk about with Batman Year One?
Well, if you don't have anything else specifically, I mean, I can say this is one of those seminal works, right? Like, it's had a huge impact on Batman as a character for decades. Honestly, it kind of changed things for the superhero industry as a whole, along with a couple of other books. And speaking for myself, huge impact on my own writing style. And so even though Frank Miller is now like a dotty old misogynist racist, and believe it or not, Batman Year One is no longer my favorite Batman origin, everything with Batman in it is in some way a continuation or a response to Batman Year One. That is bar none.
Well, that's good, because I really did like the story a lot. I was impressed by how much story, world building, and character development you got out of a comic book.
Yeah.
For somebody who's never read a comic book, you just kind of always assume it's a bunch of pictures with a little bit of words. And that's kind of what it is, but it's really not because, oh my gosh, I mean, this was dense. I
Yeah.
mean, it took us, what, 40 minutes to just go through these four issues
To hit
and
the
tell the story?
highlights, right? Like
Right.
not to dig into, well, we dug into a few of the finer points, but I mean, we people, if you've never read this thing, we hit the highlights, you know.
We did. And if anybody wants to read it, I will link to the online version in the show notes, and you can go read it. And I do recommend it. It was fantastic. I think this was perfect for my first comic book, I
All
think.
right. Excellent.
So and if I wanted to read more Batman, is you've kind of addressed this already, but is there really a particular Batman story that I should read next?
That you should read next. Okay, if we were going to really talk about it, I would probably suggest my current favorite Batman origin. It's called Zero Year. It was by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. I think it's Capullo. I'm not sure how to say his name.
Okay.
Capullo. That's the thing about comic books. I never get to hear how anybody's name is said. You know.
Right,
um,
right. Every time when all you do is read, you just have to figure out how to say it.
and so I can suggest some other things. If you really like this gritty urban Batman, they did a story called No Man's Land that ran through 6 or 7 different Bat titles for a solid year, where Gotham was broken by an earthquake, and the United States government says, we're not going to fix it, and just declares it No Man's Land, but Batman won't abandon it. So it's kind of post-apocalyptic, within just the Gotham city limits, I guess. That's great stuff. I would highly recommend that if you like this. But I like Batman the superhero more these days, and Zero Year does an amazing job of setting him up as more of a superhero and less the urban vigilante. I am also now going to list a whole slew of books that, if anybody really wants to dive into Batman, is literally the best Batman has ever been.
Go for it.
It's everything that Grant Morrison wrote. He's one of my favorite writers for comics, for anything really, but especially superhero comics. It starts in Batman and Son. Then you read The Black Glove. Then you read Batman Rest in Peace. Then you read several volumes of Batman and Robin. Then The Return of Bruce Wayne. 2 volumes of Batman Incorporated. And finish it up with Batman Incorporated Leviathan Strikes. It sounds like a lot because it is. But it is literally one story about Batman being the best that Batman has ever been.
I think I would like that better. One of my hesitations with reading comics is that I'm afraid of getting confused and constantly having things changed, having things retconned. Because, I mean, you Captain America has been around since the golden age of comics. He's not the same character today as he was back then. You have
Yeah.
to kind of restart the story and restart the cycle. And so it's not a complete story. It's several different takes. And I like being able to sit down and read something from beginning to end. And so comics
Yeah.
really they scare
Superhero
me.
comics are not going to do that for you very often. Yeah, it's true. Other comic books are, like other types, other genres are, but superhero comics are sort of built on the idea of publishing forever.
Yeah, well, I mean, I am familiar with the new Buffy comics. So, season 8, season 9, I think we're up to season 11 now. But those to me are television series told in comic book form. And I like that because I understand where it started, I understand where it's going, and it doesn't confuse me, I
Mm-hmm.
think, like regular comic book stories can. And so it's helpful to have a list like this where you can say, okay, read this set because this is a single story, and then you can turn around and say, okay, but now that you're done with that, here's another story that's different, but the character
Mm-hmm.
is also Batman.
Well, and these all fit together. These are like individual stories that also tell a much bigger, like, mega story, where Batman is the best he's ever been, and then he gets torn down, and he still comes back, and then he sort of dies, and Dick Grayson takes over as Batman with Bruce Wayne's son as his Robin, and they're awesome. I mean, so it's like it's a series of stories that fit together into one bigger story,
Right.
but
So
but
they're all kind of same universe though, right?
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Written by the same guy, like came out one after the other every month for however long it was. It was a long time. So you enjoyed this? I did not twist your arm into Batman Year One and you regret inviting me on your show?
Oh, not at all. I really did enjoy it. I think you did good picking my first comic. I
Excellent.
do. And I will definitely be coming back to ask you for your opinions in the future.
All right. Everybody else can do that too. I really like it. I really like finding the superhero comic that people don't know that they want to read. So anyone listening to the show, I'm on Twitter as oh, we're getting to this. But anyway, at Joshua Unruh, just ask me what you want to read, and I'll ask you, or say, I want to read superhero comics, Josh, and I'll ask you a few questions to try and narrow it down, which I feel like I did for you, Mandy.
Oh, you did. You did. You asked a lot of questions. It was great.
Well, here's the promise I'll make to your listeners. I'll ask you fewer questions than I did Mandy because she was prepping for a show. I just want you to have a good time.
Fair enough. So we will be back next week with another episode of Pop Culturally Deprived, where we'll talk about Indiana Jones's first outing in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Until then, please remember to rate and review us on iTunes. If you want to get in touch, you can follow me on Twitter at Mandi K. You can email me at mandyk@popculturallydeprived.com, or you can comment on this post on popculturallydeprived.com. You can also find Joshua on Twitter at Joshua Unruh. And until next time, I'm Mandi K.
And yes, Father, I shall become a bat.
I like that.